Hello everyone. So today I'm going to talk about Charles Dickens' sixth novel, The Life and Adventures of Martin Chuzzlewit. Um, this one I think I picked up for free, whatever. Um, Brilliant book, I love it. There we go. So, and then we have the illustration by Veers, as I mentioned in my last review. Pretty much a lifelong artistic career the two had. Viz did the illustrations, Dickens did the words. So, the sixth novel. By this point, Charles Dickens had already established himself as a famous novelist. He was known on both sides of the Atlantic, and indeed we have in this story quite a big section set in America. And this is because Dickens actually had to go to America to try and get them to pay the copyright expenses. So they were reading his books without giving him any money, and he failed in his bid to get his rightful money for people printing his material. So he's already done, obviously, Pickwick Papers, Barnaby Rudge. He's just finished publishing Christmas Carol, and then we have the sixth novel, Martin Chuzzlewit, which is hardly very famous and not very popular amongst commentators. It's been made into movies and BBC serializations. There's a good one for free on YouTube, starring Tom Wilkinson. It's got John Mills in it as Chuffy, young Julia Swaz, whatever her name is, as Mary. So there's some pretty famous names in it, and it's a good introduction to the novel. So I thought at this point, actually, we need to clear the air a little bit about Dickens, because there's quite often I come across the comment. My mother made it the other day as well. Yeah, Dickens and all of his, social conscience and stuff. But didn't he leave his wife and children? And that supposedly bars Dickens from being able to make any comment. It's he himself is a hypocrite, perhaps, and obviously hypocrisy is the main thrust of this novel. Martin Chuzzlewit. The logic of that is a little bit reductionist, to say the least. Does that mean that anybody who's done wrong, who's been a hypocrite, who's said one thing and done another thing, that means they can't ever criticize anybody else? We wouldn't have politicians, we wouldn't have religious leaders, I've met people who say, what Gandhi, didn't he treat his wife badly? Or Malcolm X, wasn't he, a bit of a lad, a bit of a sleep around, and the rest of it. Of course, in every great man's life, there's going to be episodes that he's not particularly proud of. But no, Dickens had a big impact, and when he wrote Oliver Twist, he kind of revealed things to Londoners that they didn't know about London, about how awful some places were to live, and it was just disgusting, pestilential, not fit for human habitation, exploitation of children, turning children into criminals and the rest of it. And he did do social work, as well as commenting and trying to be the conscience of the nation. It's interesting that this book is dedicated to one, let's get this right, Angela Burdett Coutts, who some believe is the basis of the comic character Sarah Gamp, the very poor nurse in the book. But she, along with Dickens, set up a safe house for women in London to escape prostitution and crime, and try and provide them with the means of making a honest living. So, he was involved, and he was important man in society. He became famous during his lifetime, and he entered the debates that he thought were as important. But most of all, he was a novelist. He was there to point things out and to give his own point. He was very didactic, of course, and maybe, talking about this is probably the reason why people don't love this book. There's some very lovable, wonderful characters, the rogues, and the comic characters are brilliant. Dickens is, yes, he's just full of imagination and invention, but it's very moralistic in tone. You know, you don't have to search for the main theme in this book because Dickens provides it at the end of the novel. The elder Martin Chuzzlewit clearly states that the problem here with his family is pride, and he himself is a victim of this sin of pride. And then he goes to explain how pride is affected so many people in the family. So, you know, it's like a morality tale, really. You know, it's clear what he's against, and it's clear the positive characters, and we should be following their example. People, the audience, the reader, is being preached to in this book, in a way that lots of people don't like, but I don't mind it. I always feel that didactic literature is brilliant because there's no hiding. You know, a writer is often impassioned to speak out, and why shouldn't they? You know, you don't have to hide it all behind the actions and words of your characters. You can, if you're a genius, tell as well as show. You know, but still good advice for a writer to do more showing than telling. But Dickens does plenty of both in this. So let's start with the story. Story is pretty good, actually. It kind of makes sense, and it's easier to follow. For me it was, than other stories that Dickens did. You know, it was criticised at the time, saying it's, you know, the plotting is ridiculous and it's not realistic, but actually he ties all the ends pretty successfully together at the end of the novel, and it does hold water. It does kind of make sense. We've got no magic sleight of hand of a mysterious brother that's hiding all the time, or one of these things that just left you Dickens is kind of struggling with, and obviously his very last novel, the form of the mystery. You know, like murders or deaths, questions that are unsolved, and the answers come out at the end. And he's not obviously doing the same thing that what's her name, that old dear wrote all those detective books, Miss Marples and the rest of it. You drop clues, and if you're clever enough, you can pick them up and you can guess who the murderer is. You know, Dickens hasn't quite got to that level yet, but he seems to be interested in this. And of course we have the groundbreaking character of Nadgett, who seems to be the first private detective in the history of the novel, but we'll come back to Nadgett later. So, without further ado, let's attempt to summarise the plot. It starts off with John Westlock, who... It starts off in a village in Wiltshire. It's like about 12-mile hike from Salisbury, and an old man comes to stay in a pub called the Blue Dragon. This old man seems near death. He's very unwell. He has a female companion with him. Creates a bit of a stir, you know, a young lady with an old man. He keeps himself to himself. He's quite rude. He doesn't want to see anybody. So the landlady calls he considers himself the moral arbiter, authority, the most important person in the village, which is Seth Pecksniff, who comes to the tavern, and it becomes clear quite early on in the novel that Pecksniff is actually related to the man dying in the bed, and that from the beginning of the novel we have the pot of gold. This is a pot of gold story as well. There's somebody with lots of money, and other people are interested in having that money. In the Dickens world, money is really hard to come by. Another theme that I'll talk about later, and this old dying man has money, and everybody in the family is keen to get a lion's share of the inheritance. So we have the old man with the possibility of the will, Pecksniff turns up, and then we find out more about Pecksniff. Pecksniff is he has a small holding, 2 daughters, Mercy and Charity, a very ironic name since they don't typify these qualities at all. In fact, they're called Cherry and Mary as their dad's nicknames for them. And he ponces around this village pretending to be holier than thou. He's not a priest, but he kind of like behaves like one, and he's obviously Dickens hated these types that he saw, self-righteous types, and he claims to be an architect, although he's never actually designed a building that has actually been built, and he takes on students, and the first student we see is John Westlock, who's on the verge of leaving because he's actually come into his inheritance and just fed up with Pecksniff because Pecksniff hasn't really taught him anything. Rather, it's Pecksniff's assistant, the poor suffering Tom Pinch, major positive characters in the Dickens pantheon, who befriends him and teaches him and makes his life bearable. And John Westlock has immense respect for Tom Pinch and thinks he's a wonderful person, but can't stand Pecksniff. So John Locke vanishes, and then quickly on the scene is replaced by Martin Chuzzlewit, who's the grandson of the man who we see dying in the Blue Dragon, the man with the money, basically. And it turns out that, just to give you backstory, which we get later on in the novel, Martin Chuzzlewit was the favourite of the elder Martin Chuzzlewit to inherit the money. He'd been brought up as a gentleman with all the opportunities in life, and seemed to get on really well with his granddad, except for that he fell in love with granddad's companion, Mary Graham, who was sort of taken in as an orphan by the elderly Martin Chuzzlewit as a carer for him, and he doesn't come across very positively in the start of this book, because the terms of the contract are that she'll be paid well, but only while the patient is alive, and that when he dies she will receive nothing. This is meant to be encouragement to keep him alive, I suppose, yes, because quacks in those days were quite good at killing their customers. So Martin Chuzzlewit, the junior, does the awful thing of falling in love with the nurse, and the old man disagrees, and they split up. He goes away in a huff, and the old man also feels pride and doesn't do anything to affect reconciliation. So Martin Chuzzlewit is kind of like, he's left on his own resources. He's a gentleman, and because of that he's a bit of an idiot, to be honest. But he's the central character of the book, and it has been called a picturesque novel, or the last of Dickens' picturesque novels, because it's the life and times of Martin Chuzzlewit. He tramps around the world. He goes to America and seek of his fortune, and things happen to him, and so in that extent maybe it's a bit like a Fielding novel or whatever. But Martin Chuzzlewit's story isn't really the centre of the whole book. So the situation is that when the Chuzzlewit family discover that the old man is dying and possibly rewriting his will, all the other Chuzzlewits descend upon this small village in Wiltshire, and they're a motley crew. You've got Anthony Chuzzlewit, who's the brother of the dying man. He's done very well in business. His son Jonas, who is a sadist. He's not very nice at all. And then you've got Chevy Slime, Mr. Slime, who has this peculiar sidekick called Montague Tigg. I had to check that because he reverses his name later on in the book, and he's a brilliant character, comic character, but quite a sinister character as well, who's not in the family but seems to be a hanger-on, and other members of the family, and they tried to have a family conference, but it's very clear that everybody's very selfish, and just looking out for themselves, and don't trust each other about what to do to secure the good graces of the old man and get his money when he's died. So how we progress. So what happens is that the old man recovers, and he discovers that his grandson Martin Chuzzlewit is taken up the apprenticeship offer the Pecksniff put out, because obviously he's lost John Westlock and he needs somebody else to fleece, basically. So we get a situation where Martin Chuzzlewit, he comes down to the small village in Wiltshire to start his apprenticeship, and at the same time Pecksniff's got some money now, so he can bugger off to London, but he has to go to London because he's been summoned by the elder Martin Chuzzlewit, and he's thinking money, 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 so he rushes off to London. And we have a very interesting scene in London. He takes his family, Mary and Cherry, to a really cheap boarding house run by Mrs. Todger for commercial gentlemen. I presume that Dickens must have stayed in an establishment like this. You know, this is for professional classes, so they're doing a bit better and have a better quality of life, but it's still pretty basic environment for a hotel. It's a squalid street and only for gentlemen, but he brings his daughters and they stay elsewhere. Sorry, somebody's at the door. Sorry for the interruption, the postman. So, yes, Pecksniff and the elderly Martin Chuzzlewit, they have a meeting. You can kind of tell at the time that Chuzzlewit is kind of playing Pecksniff. He can see what type of person he really is, but he suggests an alliance and a friendship, and what he really wants from Pecksniff is to expel his grandson from his house. He doesn't want him to continue having this alliance with Pecksniff and learning about architecture. It does seem quite nasty at the time, and in return Martin Chuzzlewit is prepared to hang out with Pecksniff and put up with his hypocrisy. You know, all the way through the book everybody points out that he's a hypocrite, and you know, just give over Pecksniff, you aren't really like this, we don't believe you, it's a joke. But Pecksniff continues with it, and it's quite amusing. So he kind of says, you know, I'll hang out with you more, give you more credence, and probably drop you a few pennies. So Pecksniff does that, goes back to Wiltshire. Julie kicks Martin Chuzzlewit out of the house, and so he just leaves immediately. And we've got this brilliant scene. It comes across very well in the film that I saw. He storms out the house. It's raining. He's got nothing. All his luggage is going to be sent to London later. He's just going to walk to London. He's got hardly any money or anything. And Tom Pinch runs after him and says, "Where are you going?" And he says, "I've got to go to London." And he says, "Well, shouldn't you wait till the rain stops? Why didn't you just go tomorrow? You know." No, I've got to go to London. I've got to make my fortune. I think I'll go to America and make my fortune. And Tom Pinch goes, is that really necessary? You know, already you just got this brilliant thing about Tom Pinch is nobody really pays attention to him, but he's saying some of the most sensible things in this book. You know, I'm not sure about the need to go to London to solve your problems, really. I think the answers are much closer to home, is what he's suggesting. But it's not his place, because Martin Chuzzlewit is born a gentleman, and Tom is not of that class. And Tom proffers a book for Martin Chuzzlewit. Says, you know, take this book. And Martin says, a book? What the hell do I want a book? But this is the genius of Tom, because he's such a beautiful character. What he's done, he's wrapped up money in the book, a considerable chunk of his savings, because he was paid a pittance by Pecksniff, to give to his friend Martin Chuzzlewit, so he could survive. And he must have realised at the time, that if I just give him the money, he'll refuse it, because a gentleman wouldn't take money from lower classes. So he has to use subterfuge, hide it in a book. And obviously, when Martin gets to London and discovers he's totally broke, the money turns out to be very useful. And I just think this is something really touching about, you know, you're doing a good deed and you don't want to be recognised for the good deed. You just want the good deed to be done. That's the important thing here. And Tom Pinch is a beautiful example his actions are a beautiful example of this. So on the way to London, he meets Mark Tapley. Mark Tapley he's kind of carrying on the tradition from where Sam Weller left off as the immensely resourceful valet. You know, he worked in the pub before, and he's a great comic character. He's got a really good life in the pub. He's on the verge of starting a relationship with the owner of the pub, buxom lady. He's well loved. He's practical. She sees him as a natural to take over the business or to run the business with him. But he's saying, I do love you, but I need to see the world, and more than that, I need to be challenged. It's always about being jolly, which means being cheerful under difficult circumstances. He needs to test his mettle. And he continually talks about credit. Where's the credit in it? Where's the credit in being, cheerful when you're in a cosy pub and you've got drink? And there's no credit in that. And it's interesting, this term credit, because this obviously strikes an important note with the money theme. It's not about money credit. He's talking about real moral credit, fortitude, the ability to face hardship and to deal with it and to become out a better person. This is a serious question. It's bizarre and misguided, but it's wonderful. So he meets the young Martin Chuzzlewit on the way to London, and the two make a brilliant contrast, because when they get to London, the young Martin Chuzzlewit has no clue what to do. He's a gentleman. He's bloody useless, isn't he? He's not an Australian who can get a job in a pub or anything. His notions of trying to make some money to survive are to pawn his clothes and to write letters saying that he worked for his passage to America. There's nothing very practical or of the moment, and not understanding the necessity of just finding any work and any money in order to stay alive. And in contrast, Mark Tapley easily finds him, and he says, well, I've had a few positions offered to me already, but I think there's the most credit in taking the position as your valet. I'm not expecting any money, and in fact, I'll pay for my own passage to America. So he doesn't expect anything from his master, but he can just see that this master is kind of useless and needs his help, and he's going to set up an adventure that can really prove to himself of his own self-worth and resilience. So I think you got the useless rich person who's got no idea about making money, and the working class person who's a natural at it, and he can excel in the toughest of situations. So the story goes on. So one of the things early on that Martin pawns is the watch that his grandfather gave him, which is probably worth £50, but the pawnbroker only gives him £3. And at the time, in the booth next to the young Martin Chuzzlewit is, of course, Montague Tigg. Yes. So, and he realises the true value of the watch, and actually goes into business with the pawnbroker, and we'll see about that later. So, they're a bit stuck in London. Mark's keeping it all together. He's able to make money to sort things out. Martin is despairing. Not only has he lost his love, but he hasn't got any money. He's a bit of a low ebb. But then Mark Tapley knows where Mary Graham is, and he's able to start passing notes and even organise a meeting between Mary Graham and the disgraced grandson Martin Chuzzlewit. And at the same time, mysteriously, £20 turns up in the mail. We later discover it's actually his granddad who's sent him the money. So, although he's cast him out, he's still looking after him. But we don't find this out till much later. So he's able to see Mary Graham. There's actual kissing. There's kissing in this novel. Wow. Wowzers. And then he goes off to Liverpool, where he can secure his passage to America. All right. So, my God, how does it go on? So, yes, in America, let's deal with America quite quickly. Yes, he's conned. loses all his money. Mark keeps him alive, and realizes his selfishness, and comes back to Britain. And so in between, it goes back to Wiltshire, and you've got the old Martin Chuzzlewit, who's living with Pecksniff, and Pecksniff really shows his true colours at this point, because he basically not only hits on Mary Graham, he almost assaults her in the woods when they're alone, and she's really, well, she's strong, but she's flustered and feeling, she wants to escape what could be an awful situation. There's menace to it, a bit like Dolly Varden when she's caught in the fields by what was he? You and the rest of it. It's dark and very unpleasant, and his daughters Mary and Cherry are beginning to suspect that Pecksniff wants to marry again, and wants to marry this much younger woman, and they're not happy about this at all. Obviously there's a big money thing, because if the father remarries, especially a younger woman, then when he dies, the younger woman will take over the property, and any children that they have together will probably take precedence in terms of the allotment of money for the children from the previous marriage and relationship. So their position is very much threatened, and they've had a taste of London society. And in London, we've got Jonas Chuzzlewit, who starts courting Cherry, ostensibly, but he's just a horrible character. It turns out at the last moment that he really wants to become married to the flightier, the more giggly, dizzy of the two sisters, Mary, which is a bit of a surprise to everybody, and it's a brilliant sadist move, because you just going for one, but then at the last moment changing to the other one. He poisons the relationship between the sisters. He just creates bad blood, and he's such a horrible character, horrible. He's saying straight out that I'm going to stop your laughs. I'm going to turn them to tears. I'm going to inflict misery upon you by being my wife. I'm soon going to whip you into shape, as it were. And yet, these two girls, they've been kind of in lockdown all their lives. They just want to get out. They want to experience life, love, children, the rest of it. So, stupidly, Mary goes along with the proposition and agrees to marry Jonas Chuzzlewit. Obviously, there's a lot of influence from the family, because this is seen a way of keeping the two Chuzzlewit money in the family, as it were. Jonas Chuzzlewit they're a trader, and his father Anthony Chuzzlewit set up the business. They're quite wealthy, and so Chuzzlewit, Pecksniff sees a great opportunity in this, in getting himself allied to this successful part of the family. And there's a scene where Pecksniff is told by Jonas Chuzzlewit, I'm afraid you're going to have to increase the dowry from 3,000 to 4,000, because I've taken the younger one and I made it easier for the older one to get married now. And it's bargaining, and it's, how much is the happiness if his daughter's worth? Well, it's worth £4,000. Yes, a little bit depressing. So all of that is kicking off. So where have we got to the stage now? And then we have a death. Anthony Chuzzlewit, the old man, who's the father of Jonas Chuzzlewit, he dies. Jonas is, all the way through the book, is talking about, he's better off he's dead, when he can't die too soon. He's so strong, he's never going to leave me, and the rest of it, I'm haunted by the old man. And we are led to suggest that Jonas actually poisons his dad. Later we discover that he doesn't, and that Dad dies of natural causes, but he's not to know that because he manages to procure some rat poison and is planning on poisoning his dad, but he doesn't in the end, but he's not to know that. And at the same time, he meets no longer Montague Tigg, but Tigg Montague, and rather than being just down and out, he's beautiful clothes, he has a horse and carriage, he's got an office in central London, and is beautifully appointed, and all these members of the board, the finest food and drink is laid on, and he's just a perfect host. Come, you don't have to, invest in us. I'm just interested in knowing your opinion, and let's hang out, and you seem like a fine fellow, like this. And Jonas is greedy, and he sees this apparent wealth, and he's very interested in how this was achieved, and wants to find out more about the Anglo-Bengali disinterested insurance company or something bizarre like that Montague Tigg has set up. And of course it's a Ponzi scheme. What happens is that he can pay out insurance claims with the premiums of new members, and he knows it's all going to fall down, but he doesn't care. He's actually making money, and he's quite pleased about it, and he realizes a merry-go-round that's going to spiral out of control at any point. But he's smart villain, and he employs a Mr. Nadgett, who, as I mentioned before, is probably the first example we have in literature of a private detective who follows Jonas Chuzzlewit and discovers things about him. We don't know exactly what they are, but whisper in Chuzzlewit's ear, and Chuzzlewit realizes, oh dear, they've got me now. I'm going to have to go along with this, and so gives his money to Montague Tigg in return for Montague Tigg's silence about some terrible thing that Jonas is done. And this is kind of the heart of the mystery of the book. I don't know exactly what it is. It's got a funny feeling to it, which is revealed in the end. So what happens? So Tom Pinch falls in love with Mary Graham. She loves his organ playing, but he's selfless. He knows that she loves Martin Chuzzlewit, and so he wants to help her. And when she's attacked by Pecksniff, she comes to him saying, this is a terrible man, help me. It's awful, I don't know what to do. Pecksniff is in the church at the time, and hides, and realizes the game's up. He sneaks back home before Tom Pinch, and sacks him in front of in front of the old Martin Chuzzlewit, and escapes this accusation of attacking Mary Graham, and turns it all onto the fault of Tom Pinch. He sacrifices Tom Pinch, his loyal servant and his most faithful admirer. The only person who doesn't call Pecksniff a hypocrite is Tom Pinch. He really believes in him. He totally believes in him, and it's quite sad that everybody's pointing out to Tom Pinch, no, he's not like this, but he won't believe them. He'll stand by him. But this is the point where Tom Pinch realizes he's actually a horrible person, and Tom happily leaves to go to London. But anyway, we got this point. But when he walked into the parlour, where the old man was engaged, as Jane had said, with pen and ink and paper on a table close at hand, for Mr. Pecksniff was always very particular to have him well supplied with writing materials, he became less cheerful. He was not angry, he was not vindictive, he was not cross, he was not moody, but he was grieved. He was sorely grieved. As he sat down by the old man's side, 2 tears, not tears like those with which recording angels blot their entries out, but drops so precious that they use them for their ink, stole down his meritorious cheeks. So this is Dickens completely taking the piss out of Pecksniff. Butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, and just like with Pickwick in the earlier novel, it's very clear Dickens is taking every opportunity to show Pecksniff for what he really is. He's, these pretend tears. He's saying that, they're precious, more precious than angels' tears. They would be used by angels for ink. He's just, but we can clearly see this is the point where he's just assaulted Mary Graham, and Tom Pinch is just trying to calm her down, and that he can turn around at this point and be holier than thou when he's just an awful person is very telling, and Dickens is, with clinical sharpness, cuts Pecksniff down to order. So we can see things are beginning to change, and the old man's attitude is beginning to change. So in London, Tom Pinch doesn't have any money, but he has his sister Ruth Pinch, and with what little money they've saved together, they set up a house. They're desperate for work. She's going to look for teaching work, and Tom's going to try and do anything. As I said, he's not a rich man, so therefore he's got some practical nature to him. He could probably find something to do, and he gets a mysterious job set up by, he doesn't see who his patron is, but it's a lawyer that sets him up. He's got to do some library work, and this turns out to be the old Martin, and what happens is, we have to go back to Jonas Chuzzlewit. God, this is taking ever to explain the bloody story of this. Jonas Chuzzlewit realises he's going to be subjected to blackmail for the rest of his life by Montague Tigg, and decides to kill Montague Tigg. So he pretends to go to Bedford a couple of days, but really escapes out the door, takes a coach to the countryside, where Montague Tigg's going to be, and kills him while he's walking home. Right? Quite shocking. Puts on a agricultural smock as a disguise, and then gets back to London and pretends like he's been in bed all the time. All right, he's set this up, and then yes, the police descend upon Jonas Chuzzlewit, and they accuse him of killing his father, and then it falls out that actually Chuffy protected the old man and prevented him from taking poisonous medicine, and that he died of natural causes, and then Nadgett appears and says, yes, but Jonas Chuzzlewit, I saw him kill Montague Tigg, and so he's guilty of murder. So he gets, he was going to be sent to prison, but he takes poison and ends his life. And then there's the big, a bit like, Agatha Christie, that was the person I was thinking before. At the end of Agatha Christie novels, there's the big reveal where they all have to meet in a room, and everything's explained. And we have the situation where Martin, the old Martin Chuzzlewit, gathers Tom and his grandson and the family and Mrs. Todger and Mrs. Gamp and Pecksniff, everybody before him, and he explains that, Pecksniff, you're a hypocrite and you just bugger off, you're not getting anything. And Pecksniff leaves like Malvolio. He's not part of the comic resolution in this at all. He can't be forgiven for it. The rest of his family say, you're very selfish, but you get a little bit. Mrs. Todger, Mrs. Gamp, your heart's in the right place, but you could try a little bit harder. So he helps them out, and then we've got 2 marriages. Martin is allowed to eventually marry Mary Graham, and very quickly John Westlock, who's the first student, he falls very quickly in love with Tom Pinch's sister, Ruth Pinch, and they get married. So we have 2 marriages at the end, and you can see it's all wrapped up very well. Everybody's brought in, and it's a plot you can understand. It's a plot that's taken me bloody 38 minutes to explain, when I really wanted to talk about other things. I don't think I'm going to bother with the summarising plots again. It just takes too long. So it's a pot of gold story, as the saying. There's one lot of money and everybody's wanting it, and we can see how this affects people's behaviour quite badly. They become greedy. Pecksniff becomes a total hypocrite and prepared to sacrifice the happiness of his children to achieve money. We've got Jonas, who is prepared to kill his dad to get money. We've got Mary, Mary and Cherry, of course. They're worried about their inheritance because of their father looking to get another wife. We've got obviously the character Montague Tigg, who's does get money, but he just gets money by cheating people. He starts off in the novel just begging, basically, begging for Chevy Slime and then for himself. He's just always on the lookout for money, and obviously very greedy, and there's very little that he wouldn't do for money. And who else is there? And then of course there's there's Martin Chuzzlewit, who's he's a gentleman, so money is a little bit beneath him, but what he is, of course, is selfish. He should have tried to effect a reconciliation with his uncle, which is his fiance, his great love is trying to indicate to him, but he's just obsessed about improving. He's got pride. He don't, I can't go grovelling to my grandfather. I have to make my own way in the world, and that's some sort of stupid romantic notion of going to America. And what do we see in America? We see a nation obsessed with greed, and they consider it a virtue to be able to cheat people. It's very clear that he gets caught up in a land deal, buying unsighted land. So it's like land that you don't see first, you pay for, and they're conning him, and they're sort of patting each other on the back of how wonderful it is that we can con these newcomers to America, and that's considered virtuous. And Dickens he's letting rip, basically, and obviously some American commentators aren't too keen on this book, but he does point out in later editions that lots changed in America, and that his representation of America is set very much in the past, and they are much better now than they were before. Presumably that's when they started paying him royalty money. So what you see from Americans, they're terrible table manners. They all rush to get to the table in the boarding house where Martin and Mark are staying, and if you don't get the food on your plate and down your mouth as quickly as possible, you're not going to eat. It's a little bit preposterous. He meets a man who's running a newspaper, who just interested in scandalous things that politicians say, and has little knowledge of the rest of the world. Dickens satirically notes that everybody seems to have a title. They're all colonels or captains or something like that, and you can't see the reality of it all. They go to Eden, and of course it's a stinking, swamping pit, and the people who sold the land to Mark and Martin don't really expect him to come back down the river. They just think it's all these suckers, well done to us. They go down the river, they get malaria, they die there, and problem solved, and we can sell their plot of land again. Doing wonderful things for society. And then there's a scene where Martin meets this very nice family, ostensibly civilized, make nice conversation, but then they start talking about slavery, and for them it's a dark spot. Dickens is he's taking the gloves off here. He says, like, you talk all the time about freedom and how important your freedom is, and how this wonderful land of America is based upon freedom. And Dickens is saying, but you've got slaves. So you think everybody's got rights mysteriously apart from these people who have made you rich, the slaves. And there's one comic scene where in a bar they have some sort of society to raise funds for the Irish, who sees them as fighting from the yoke of British imperialism, and they're getting on lovely with this, apart from the Irish send them back a letter saying Yeah, and we think slavery should be abolished, and they suddenly go, well, we can't support the Irish anymore because they're criticising us. They're saying terrible things about us, like this. Dickens is getting to the heart of the issue, the hypocrisy of most of the Americans that he meets, and obviously people don't like it. It's caricatured slightly, but there's lots of amusing scenes, and I think it's marvellous that travel in those days, transatlantic travel, steamship just being invented and the rest of it, took a long time, and it was quite a brave thing to do. Dickens went over there and reported what he saw. There is the argument that Dickens wasn't initially going to do this, but the novel wasn't doing so well in serialised form. It came out from 1842 to 44. The numbers weren't brilliant, so he thought, spice it up. Let's include America. Right, so, yes, that's America kind of dealt with. What else to say about this book? The positive characters. So, yes, we've got Tom Pinch. He's not driven by money, but by honesty, clearly, and doing the right thing and helping people. He's a wonderful, warming character. He's not very handsome. He's bald. He's not prepossessing. He's not going to be a lady killer at all. And he sacrifices himself to help others. He's quite prepared to remain a bachelor throughout his life now. Just happy that his sister's found somebody, and that Mary Graham, his secret love, has found love herself and marries Martin Chuzzlewit. He's just happy to serve and to see his betters do well. And then we've got Mark Tapley. As I said, it's a bit like a bit of a Sam Weller character, who, yes, he's a credit to himself on the journey over to America. He helps a family. All the time is by Mark's side, keeping him alive when they go to Eden, and first Martin gets malaria and then Mark gets malaria, and he's always cheerful, pointing out that always look on the bright side. We've still got some grain left, we've still got some food left, I'm sure we'll make it in Eden, just need to grow some crops and the rest of it. And he's always helping people whatever situation he's involved in. And there's one scene where he meets a black person and he's very curious about this. It's like, oh, you're kind of like me, aren't you? You're the serving class, and he's very curious about the black man's position in society. It's only a very brief mention, but we've got black people suddenly come into the book, into Dickens's world. And what happens? Oh yes, he goes back to the pub, realising that yes, there's no place like home, and that it's not actually a bad thing to be jolly in a nice place, and marries the owner of the pub, and yes, the Blue Dragon goes from success to success, I imagine. And then you've got Ruth Pinch. She's in a house educating the kids who aren't very nice. She's kind of a female version of Tom Pinch, really. She typifies all the virtues, basically. She's not very well drawn. People have said she's maybe a bit of a fantasy for Charles Dickens. And then yes, she marries John Westlock, who's he's just on the edge of the story. His main contribution to the plot is that he discovers the fact that rat poison was bought shortly before Anthony Chuzzlewit dies, but he's a man who values Tom Pinch and can see all the wonderful things in Tom Pinch in his beautiful sister. So yes, hell, why not marry her? And then we've got Mary Graham, who is an orphan, and she can't risk her job to marry Martin Chuzzlewit, because she needs a job, clearly, and if he hasn't got his inheritance, then she'd just be destitute. And obviously she wants to care for the old man, so she's in a very difficult position. So it's the heart and the head conflicting, and she wants to believe in her love, but at the same time you can see that she, like Mark Tapley, thinks it's a ridiculous notion going to America. and that he'd be much better served by trying to repair relations with his grandfather. So she's a very positive female character, although she's not particularly fleshed out very much. She just, she shows her bottle when Pecksniff is molesting her. She won't have anything to do with it, and she tries quite forcefully to get away from him. So, yes, hypocrisy, yeah. So it's about selfishness, hypocrisy. I've already pointed out that Dickens really takes the piss out of Pecksniff, and he's a kind of very much like a comic character, almost like a Punch and Judy character, really. He's there to be knocked down. And people look at this and they think, as I say, yeah, but Dickens had a relationship. He left his wife and family behind. Well, not at this point, it has to be said. Ellen Ternan was an actress, and he met her in 1857. He finished this book in 1844, so he hasn't betrayed his wife and family just yet. And of course, Turnham was his secret mistress, which was kind of hidden until Dickens's son died or something like this. It's a scandal of British society, really, but everybody knew it was an open secret, really. So yeah, maybe Dickens was a hypocrite as well, but bloody hell, we're all hypocrites. That doesn't mean we can't point out hypocrites. In the words of the great Bob Dylan, name me someone that's not a parasite and I'll go out and say a prayer for him. Well, parasite or hypocrite, they're interchangeable here, really. It just doesn't happen. But yes, Dickens is clearly putting his message forward. It's a moral message. Pride gets in the way. People are selfish, and obsession with money. Money changes people, and you should be more like Tom Pinch or Mark Tapley, and indeed the working classes and the serving classes come out looking pretty good in this book, to be honest, compared to the stupidity of their betters. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening and viewing. Stay safe. Bye.